Hitler had a blitzkrieg that swept across Western Europe, leaving Britain really standing alone. Roosevelt knew immediately that he wanted to help Britain with everything he could.
If Great Britain goes down, the Axis powers will control the continents.
The Atlantic Charter was conceived in secrecy in a meeting between Churchill and FDR. And if the Germans had found out that these two people were meeting, they could have been eliminated. So it was a very risky venture on both their parts.
There will be no blackout of peace in the United States.
Many months led up to this meeting that would solidify the Atlantic Charter, when personal trust, political will, and shared values changed the course of the 20th century. It began in 1940 when Hitler swept across Western Europe, destroying tens of thousands of lives and property, making countries surrender to him, one after the other, Holland and Luxembourg and Belgium, all in the space of a week or so, and then even the fall of France some weeks later, leaving Britain really standing alone in Europe against Hitler. Roosevelt wanted to help Britain, but he was hamstrung by the isolationism in the country and by a series of neutrality laws which prevented him from getting any weapons to help Britain. Roosevelt was in a very complicated position, but he decided that he's going to do something anyway. He designates weapons as surplus so they can't really fall into this neutrality prevention and ships them over to Britain. However, the generals say to him, "What you are doing is so risky that if Britain falls, as we expect she will, and we find our weapons there in German hands, you will be impeached or hung by a lamppost." Nonetheless, he continued with these surreptitious deliveries, but they were nowhere near enough. America in 1940 was only 18th in military power. We had let our military deteriorate after World War I, and during the Depression, we had only a few hundred fighter planes, a one-day supply in the war at that time. So finally, he started building up our own supplies. And then Roosevelt wanted to give everything he could to Britain that was coming off the assembly line. But he was hamstrung by the neutrality clause. So Roosevelt's thinking, I know what we can do. We can lend our weapons to Britain. They don't have to buy them, and then they can return them when the war is over. But the real dilemma for FDR was that he knew that he couldn't move unless he could carry his country along. So he said, look, if your neighbor's house is on fire and they need your hose in order to put the flames out to protect their house and your house, you're going to lend them your hose, and they can get you a new hose at the end of this all.
For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself. There will be no bottlenecks in our determination to aid Great Britain.
Eventually, the education through his fireside chats gets through to the Congress, gets through to the people, and 5 months later, the Lend-Lease Act passes to pay for all of this equipment going overseas. Then, through Lend-Lease, America was able to lend our now greater supply to England and then eventually to all the allies in the world.
We shall give every possible assistance to Britain and to all who with Britain are resisting Hitlerism with force of arms.
And that was really the beginning of our great commitment. But then that commitment to Britain would be even more solidified by this meeting between Prime Minister Churchill and FDR in Argentia. Roosevelt had to reluctantly, but very strategically, just move step by step by step into a greater and greater involvement. In 1941, Roosevelt announced to his people, including Eleanor, that he was going on a fishing trip in August, and serious fishing was going to take place. He didn't quite say exactly where. Eleanor said she saw the smile on his face, and she knew that there was something much more mysterious behind this fishing trip. So the presidential yacht went up to Martha's Vineyard, where the USS Augusta was waiting, and then that started sailing north, and finally went to a little fishing village near Argentia off the coast of Newfoundland, where he waited for Churchill to arrive. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, Churchill was so excited at the thought of finally getting together with Roosevelt that they said he hopped along the grass like a schoolboy getting out of the last term of school. The meeting had to be in secret for so many different reasons. For one thing, Roosevelt was in a very complicated position with isolationism in his country. the same time, there were U-boats in the Atlantic, so it could be very dangerous for either of them to be in that area. And if the Germans had found out that these two people were meeting at the same place at the same time, they could have been eliminated. Then the whole history of the world would have been different. So it was a very risky venture on both their parts. Churchill comes over from the HMS Prince of Wales ship to the USS Augusta, where Roosevelt is waiting for him. Churchill was very nervous, knowing nothing less than British survival was on the line in this delicate dance with the United States. Meanwhile, Roosevelt's first words are so warm, "At last, we've finally gotten together." And it was said that his smile was so dazzling, one of the aides said, that you couldn't take your eyes off it. And Churchill later said that meeting Roosevelt for that first time was almost like opening your first bottle of champagne. There was such effervescence. During the 4 days that followed, they were together endlessly. They talked from the mornings to the afternoons to the nights. They ate together, they drank together, and they sealed a friendship and a charter that would change the future of the world. The document itself is quite incredibly fascinating. The Atlantic Charter set forth the principles and the values that would govern World War II and its aftermath. Just imagine, they're talking about the end of a war that the United States is not even in yet, but they're looking that far ahead with a vision. What the Charter says is that neither country will seek any territorial gains, and if there are any territorial adjustments that have to be made, they'll have to reflect the free will of the people. Then they also talk about the fact that they want freedom from want or fear. They want economic development. And then finally, they talk about the fact that they want to have some sort of general security mechanism for disarmament and for the general peace of the world to be maintained. And that's a forerunner of the United Nations. So in this symbolic commitment, they're talking about things that are going to happen in the future. It's an extraordinary thing to understand the visionary nature of this document. Even before America's in the war, before Pearl Harbor, conceived in secrecy in this fishing village off Argentia by these two characters, Winston Churchill and FDR. Both Churchill and Roosevelt met each other in a darkened world, and yet the two of them came together with conviction, clarity, and moral courage. They had humility in their meeting with each other. They both gave way to the other, even as differences arose between them. They had a sense of mastery of nuance. Roosevelt knew that he could only move step by step, and Churchill had to understand that he couldn't move Roosevelt further than he wanted to go because of the country's limitations at the time. How lucky all of us were to have these two men in the same decade at the same time leading the Allied forces against fascism and Hitler's might.